the strongest predictor of political leanings is race. That is the strongest predictor of all. Now, yes, there was a time when the Democratic Party was a very able arbiter of voter suppression.
Right.
But during that time, they didn't like black people either, and they had very little comfort with anyone who was not white. And so as the Democratic Party shifted, their embrace of those oppression tactics shifted as well.
Yeah.
It has now been adopted by the party that is most racially monolithic and racially homogenous, but also the party that realizes that its only method of holding on to power is constricting those who can participate. So it's less about incumbency and more about the larger issue of political power.
Right.
There are communities that have always been denied that power because their inclusion means that we have to be better. And the challenge that I see facing us in 2019 and 2020 is that our demographic change is terrifying people who should be upholding the basic nature of what makes America great, and that is our democracy. And they are willing to sacrifice democracy to hold on to waning power.
And of course, I'm conscious of the fact, as I'm sure you are, that we're heading into another decennial redistricting cycle.
Absolutely.
And in some ways, what you're saying about voting applies on redistricting, a dotted line over to the other, which is not voters picking their elected officials, but elected officials picking their voters.
Exactly.
And in the case of voter suppression, it's elected officials picking their non-voters or not voters,
exactly.
right? Is it how it goes.
And we have to remember, this is a feature of the American political system. This is not a bug. From our inception, we arbitrarily decided women should not be heard, that blacks were not actually human, and no one else was really given consideration. And over time, as we were forced to add more to the population and add more to the voting process, we created more and more hurdles to make it difficult for those that new power to be made manifest. One of the other things I launched Fair Fight in November. I launched Fair Count in March because the census, is incredibly important for redistricting. It is a political power play, which is why it's being underfunded by this current administration, because this is the first census where 80% of the population will complete their census online, even though in most states, especially in southern states, you have vast swaths of the community that do not have access to the internet. Those also tend to concomitantly be either rural and poor or people of color. And so this again is not just incumbency protection. This is power protection.
And so if I understand, if you suppress the number of people who participate in the census, then you suppress the political power of those growing populations. In a state like Texas, for instance, where apportionment may provide 3 or even 4 additional congressional seats, many of them in majority-minority areas, you disincentivize people from participating, or you motivate people not to participate. You keep the count down. You don't provide as many congressional seats in that case. It translates directly to political power.
It is absolutely directly connected. And it's also connected to the resources that can come into communities to make them stronger. When a community is not counted in the census, that community loses access to resources that could have prevented whatever pathologies.
Federal funding, I mean, right? Federal funding hit completely off of that.
For example, so $900 billion is allocated annually based on the census. If the expected undercount, and this is expected, undercount of black people in America happens in all 50 states, that will cost $3 billion per year to those communities. And then you add to that the complexity of prison gerrymandering, which largely means that communities of color are incarcerated in majority white rural counties. Those counties get resources to which do not benefit the very people who are being counted, but the communities that need those resources to diminish the likelihood of that incarceration rate do not receive the dollars to which they're entitled.